I'm a little triggered because I just watched the worst post-workout nutrition window video I've ever seen. It's terrible. It needs to be fixed. So I'll give you the top 10 post-workout nutrition myths. I'll invoke my NASA research experience at the Johnson Space Center. We'll look at some of my nutrient timing research, look at muscle protein synthesis from the lab that inadvertently founded the whole anabolic window idea. Basically, I'll break down everything I learned in my naive attempt to become the world's expert in nutrient timing. At the end, I'll show you what I do with my clients and athletes. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get right to it. I'm David Barr, and if you're looking to get bigger, faster, stronger, get leaner, go longer, hit that subscribe and then the little bell so you don't miss the latest updates. And I'm going to one-up it for this video. So if you think that objective evidence is more important than special feelings, which is how most people report information, then you can help advance the conversation by sharing this video. Get this info out there. So myth number one, this is a bit of a gentle warm-up, but it's about the glycemic index, or GI. This is a rating of how quickly a carbohydrate is supposed to be digested and absorbed into our blood. Massively flawed. It's going to require an entirely different video on that. I'll link to it in the discussion once that pops up. This one's a hard pill to swallow because, like a lot of you back in the day, I took finger pricks after meals to see how my body was responding to meals. Unfortunately, it turns out to not be as clear-cut as we thought. It's actually a little more complicated. A lot more complicated. That's why it's going to take its own video. But for now, if you want more, take a look at the Waxy Maize Starch Lit Review and Investigative Report that I did for bodybuilding.com. All you have to do is Google Waxy Maize Starch, and it's probably going to be the first search result. So it was pretty awesome. Special thanks to Anthony Almada for giving me as much info as he did. But right now, glycemic index doesn't seem to be the way to go. I have to give credit to Kamal Patel from examine.com. Changed my life by giving me the best way to look at carbohydrates, acellular versus cellular sources. So if a cell's all crushed up like bread, for example, it's probably going to be more rapidly absorbed. But if it's intact inside the cells, then it's going to be a slower absorbing protein. So fantastic update on an outdated idea, which is a glycemic index, or GI. And if anyone's still clinging to the whole simple versus complex carb thing, that's got to go. That's 20 years ago. So then we evolved to glycemic index. Turns out that's not right. So now it's cellular, acellular sources. Quick sidebar, I'm going to refer to my own stuff a lot. It's not because I'm being self-indulgent. It's because there's just way too much info to go into detail here. So it's not really about me. It's not about me at all. It's about getting you the best source of info. So that's why I'm going to link out to other articles, lit reviews, investigative reports that I've done. So myth number two, another warm-up myth was the idea of combining a solid protein with a fast carbohydrate source, expecting the carbs to be absorbed quickly. I don't know where this came from. It's almost like we have separate compartments in our gut for fast and slow things. No, it all gets mixed together. So if you're consuming a solid protein, it's going to be a slower digesting protein. Doesn't matter if it's lean like chicken or fish, it's still going to be a slower absorbing protein. And that's ultimately going to slow down the rest of your carbohydrate intake. Again, we don't have different compartments in our gut, so keep things fast or slow. Question of the day, what are you consuming post-workout? Are you consuming protein and carbs, just protein, whole meals? Let us know in the comments below. Myth number three comes from something called a drip feed. Now, if you're consuming fast carbs and protein, this is not what you're looking to do. You're looking for anabolic spikes. You're not looking for slow and steady release or a drip feed. So most of the time we do want a drip feed, but again, if you're consuming that whey protein, consuming fast carbs, that's not what you're after. You want that anabolic spike or anabolic pulse. So I cover this in detail with the nutraceutical effect in the BCAA article. I'll link to it above in the top right, and I'll link to it in the discussion as well, because right now BCAAs are broken. We need to fix them, and we do this not by drip feeding BCAAs, not by throwing them into a protein shake. We fix it by causing that anabolic spike. Now, the most important time to drip feed our nutrients is going to be at night when we sleep. It's typically thought to be the most anabolic time. Turns out it's our most catabolic time because we're fasting. The way to fix this, the best drip feed is going to be casein. Casein protein, slow absorbing, going to feed the muscle overnight, going to feed the gut overnight, which is the main source of catabolism or muscle breakdown. But that's what we're after. It's potentially one of the most anabolic practices we can do. It's actually going to be anti-catabolic. It's going to help with growth, adaptation, and recovery. Great for bodybuilders and athletes alike. I'll link to that in the discussion and up top. Okay, now we're starting to get into the harder concepts for us to absorb. Number 4 is going to be the idea of nutrient timing itself. This is one of those things. I was giving a talk for a class of prospective strength coaches during a CSCS exam prep, and man, I feel like I ruined their entire day by telling them, yeah, nutrient timing, not that big of a deal. In fact, I believe this concept so much, I picked up my life, moved to Texas to the lab that had inadvertently founded the anabolic window concept. And man, it was only after I got there that I realized, well, no, there's no actual anabolic window for muscle. Now, there is a window for carbohydrate absorption into the muscle, glycogen restoration, and that's mostly important for athletes who are competing regularly or training regularly. For the average person, it just doesn't matter that much. I'll cover that more in a second. Now, related concept is myth number 5, and that's the anabolic window itself. The idea that there's this magic window for protein ingestion where it's going to have a magical effect on growth, adaptation, recovery. And unfortunately, I learned the hard way. That's not the case. What we were seeing was what's called the nutraceutical effect, and I covered this in the BCAA article. And we mistook this for a post-workout window idea. Again, I did this for years. I reported on it for years. Well, turns out I screwed up. So did most of us. So it's really about tapping into that nutraceutical effect, spiking your blood amino acid levels, or even more specifically, the anabolic trigger leucine. Again, cover that in the BCAA article, but it's the real way to get that boost in protein synthesis. However transient or short-lived it may be something that you want to do. Now, the problem with the anabolic window concept is you see people reporting all kinds of different durations. This is going to be 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. Well, people need to get things straight because it's really none of the above. It's a misinterpretation of the research. I did it myself, not a big deal. We just need to evolve, get really into the 21st century information. Now, to be clear, I'm talking about this guy who did this terrible video. I'm not ripping on him as an ad hominem or personal attack. He does a lot of good for people. Just turns out this video was really bad. He based it on an old book called Nutrient Timing. This book, has some decent info, but it's really old now, and it was outdated before it even hit the shelves, especially when it comes to the whole anabolic window idea. So worse yet, he confused it with actual science. A lay book is not going to be scientific. It's meant for lay people to absorb and digest. So a big, big mistake. Now, the change I tried to do based on nutrient timing was in this book, textbook. This is very different from a lay book. This is award-winning, 2015 Most Delicious from my dog. Love to chew on this thing, but ultimately it's a great book in terms of the science. So I co-authored a chapter with Dr. Josh Cotter about nutrient timing, the window, the transient dosing or short-term dosing that we need. I don't make any money off this. It's just a very thorough lit review. Credit to the editors, Dr. Lonnie Lowry and Joey Antonio. This is a great resource. Myth number 6 is going to be massive carb doses. I don't know why these are still pervasive, but 3-to-1 carb to protein ratio, even a 4-to-1 carb to protein ratio after strength training, come on, that's insane. And the author in this video actually suggested 1 gram of carbs per pound of body weight in a couple hours after training. That is insane. We just don't deplete that much glycogen when we're training. We don't. If you want more info on that, got another textbook chapter in here, this time co-authored with Anthony Almada, who I mentioned earlier. Guy's an absolute rock star when it comes to supplementation, but especially carbohydrates. We go into a deep dive in this textbook. Again, this is very heavy science. It's not an easy read. I don't make a dime from it, again, but it is a great resource. So what are we looking for in terms of repletion of carbs after training? Well, it really depends on what you're training. So if you're doing a heavy leg day, you're going to need a little bit more. If you're doing biceps, you're not depleting much glycogen, especially for, say, powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters. You're just not depleting glycogen. Now, this doesn't mean you don't want to be fed for the workout. You definitely want to have your pre-workout carbs, and I'll get to that in a second. But as far as post-workout carbs, we just don't need that much after strength training. Sidebar, you get bonus points if you recognize the original top 10 post-workout nutrition myths article from T-Nation back in the day. I think this one really kicked off the whole paradigm shift for nutrient timing. I'm really proud of it, but apparently people are still being fed the old school info. That's something we need to change. We need to advance the conversation. After that article on T-Nation, I expanded on the concepts in my first 2 books called the Anabolic Index These are lay books. They are not meant to be thorough science reviews. These are not lit reviews, okay? These are meant to be read and digested by the average athlete. Very different from the textbook chapters I mentioned earlier. Myth number 7, the idea of using 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrates to get an insulin spike after your workout, the idea being to not only store more glycogen, but actually increase creatine uptake into muscle. Wow, this is something I did for years. I screwed this up for so long. Unfortunately, it turns out we need about 70 to 80 grams to get an insulin spike high enough to really drive that creatine in there. I discussed this in my creatine video. This is where my research experience at the Johnson Space Center comes into play. Working for NASA, very cool experience, getting to moon landing, old school stuff. Ultimately, I was working with a radioactive poison to do research on this. I cover that in the creatine video. I'll link to it. That one you definitely have to check out. But suffice it to say, you need a lot of carbs to get the insulin high enough to get the creatine into your muscle. So contrast these ideas of consuming a lot of carbs after your workout, but you want a spike with 30 grams after a workout. These two ideas are incompatible. The way around that is to look at the creatine video, also covered a bit in the beta-alanine video. These are all linked. Check it out, fully referenced. It's an extrapolated theory, but there's a lot of rock-solid research behind it. Myth number 8, the idea that insulin is the most anabolic hormone in the body, and there's a catch to that because it is technically the most anabolic hormone in the body, but this is biochemically speaking because it's very anabolic for carbohydrates and fats. It's great for storing carbs and fats in our body. Doesn't really matter for protein. I bought into this hard. I tried to keep my insulin high for many years, much to the detriment of my body composition, because it turns out insulin, we do need it for muscle growth, but we only need a little bit. We don't need that much. So the idea of keeping insulin higher is not better. It's going to be one of those things that you have a little bit of insulin with your protein containing meal. Protein's going to stimulate a bit of insulin anyway. You're going to be covered. You don't need a lot of insulin for muscle growth, adaptation, recovery. Hopefully, presenting my mistakes, I get away from the concept that I'm just some dick pointing the finger at somebody who screwed up. No, I'm trying to show that, we've all been there. I've probably screwed up more than anyone else, and hopefully showing this, you can learn from my mistakes. There's no reason to continue with something that's not working. Unless you really like it, then go ahead. But I'm not trying to take anything away from you. Just keep doing what you want to do. It doesn't mean you have to listen to any of it. I mean, experience is often the best teacher, but I feel negligent if I didn't share this information, maybe help you save some money, time, effort, whatever it is. Myth number 9, antioxidants. Man, I bit into this one hard. The idea of using things like vitamin C, vitamin E, NAC or N-acetylcysteine after training to mitigate that stress, that oxidative stress that we fear so much. Turns out we might actually be hurting our gains when we do that because we often confuse stress with something bad. Stress isn't necessarily bad. In fact, the very reason we train is to induce stress. It's called eustress or positive stress. That causes our body to adapt. So stress isn't necessarily bad, and when we take away that stress after training, we could be hurting our gains. This is especially important for athletes in a hypertrophy phase, people looking to change their physique, bodybuilders. Now, conversely, in-season team sport athletes might actually benefit from antioxidants, but that is a topic for another video. I will link to that once I do that one. This is a big topic, one that we screw up quite a bit, and I screwed up for years. Myth number 10. Bit of a warm down, the idea that cortisol is going to be high after training, so we try to mitigate that. This is largely based on fasted research. Now, when I would do research, we would always have our subjects fasted because it helps remove or eliminate a lot of the variables in the research. So we have a higher fidelity result. But in terms of actual training, we're going to be fed before our training. There's no reason you want to go into a workout fasted. So especially for strength training, you're going to be fed. It's going to mitigate that cortisol response. It's not something you need to worry about. Okay, so what's the take home here? Well, I have to preface by saying, even though I'm CSCS, recognized strength coach with the NCAA, and a dual certified sports nutritionist, I don't make recommendations or prescriptions. It's just a CYA thing. But I can tell you what I do and what I would probably do in your situation. So again, check out the other videos because there's a lot of info, so can't cover everything here, but pretty simply, I make sure I'm fueled for the workout. Now remember that the workout is the stress stimulus to which our body's going to adapt. So great that there's a lot of focus on the 24, 48 hours after the training bout, but it's really the stimulus that's going to come from the workout itself. So you want to make sure that's optimized. This means having your carbohydrates. I include things like creatine, beta-alanine. I include my branched chain amino acids. Again, I refer to all this in the different videos. Heavily based on the research. Right now it's extrapolated theory, but I think it's pretty tight. This is going to be the topic of my 4th book. I'll link to it as soon as it's available in the discussion. Now another tip: to consume these nutrients, you often have to be fasted. So what this means is you fast for a time before consuming these ingredients, these supplements, then consume them 30 or so minutes before your workout. Have your lift, and then I would consume a whey protein, a fast digesting, absorbing protein. And it's not because there's a magical post-workout window. This is a key point. It's because nutrient timing is based on the preceding meal. That's the key. That's the key to nutrient timing that so many people miss. Something we need to fix, and I think this video is going to help with that. So there's your breakdown of the top 10 post-workout nutrition myths. If you found this video helpful, share it with someone. They just might owe you a protein shake. Love having people advance the conversation. Leave me comments in the discussion below. I'm David Barr. Until next time, raise the bar.